Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. If someone in your life has BPD, you know how difficult it can be, and you need to learn how to heal from those toxic relationships. And that's where this show comes in. Expert education, expert knowledge, expert insight, and delivered with compassion and empathy. With your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. To purchase and book sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. Now your host, AJ Mahari.
And just a reminder that, well, I'll mention this just a few more times, but my beloved Roddy Cross, 12-and-a-half-year-old dog Jake, who was the primary snorer in my podcasts and videos in the background, was euthanized on Tuesday, August 6, 2024, and still a huge hole here in our household. Missing Jake like crazy. Unfortunately, the vet didn't do the best job. Jake was conscious and stressed in a couple of points where he shouldn't have been, and that makes the whole thing much tougher in grief, and I will be taking action against that vet, as they should never euthanize another dog because they're just beyond the time at which they can do their job successfully. So that was another added thing that broke my heart, on top of having to say goodbye to Jake, was when Jake was stressed and he just was conscious at 2 points when he shouldn't have been, and that caused him suffering. And to put it mildly here, that made me beyond livid and extremely angry, and it also hurt. But the point is that Jake is now, and has been for a couple days, at peace and free. But it's really changed the process for my partner and I, and even friends of mine. So anyway, that's this unfortunate way that, something untoward happened during Jake's euthanasia. But he is gone and he is free, and we're missing him like crazy. And right now, I just want to say I won't be talking about Jake too much more in the beginning of podcast, but I just wanted to say that the good news right now is that I still have my almost 2.5-year-old Rottweiler, Toby, and my 10-month-old Lab Golden Retriever Cross, Grace, and our little guy, 10-week-old Dante, who is a red fox, a purebred red fox Labrador Retriever with an amazing stability and temperament, and he's a hoot. And we've had him for about almost 3 weeks. Yeah, almost 3 weeks now. And the thing is, that little guy, bless his heart, made me laugh last night. And that felt really good for a brief period of time because a lot of grief going on. But so with the 3 dogs that are still here, and the pack, and it's much younger now, we miss Jake like crazy. But just remember, I still have these 3 dogs, and 2 of them are quite young. And Toby's known for the odd big bark in the middle of just about anything. So this will be part of your listening experience should they decide to do some ballistic, like little puppyish, or 2-year-old type things as I'm recording. So just know that it's quiet right now, and I'm gonna give it about my best shot, but you never know when that quiet gets interrupted by a Toby bark or a Grace fiddling around with something, or a Grace and Dante playing together moments of banging stuff around or knocking things over, or maybe just, a little guy, Dante, kind of, I don't know, chomping on something or getting up to some noise of his own. So, yeah, that's the pack that remains. We miss Jake like crazy. And now on to what this episode is really about, and I hope that you find it helpful. In response to a comment left on a video I did called Codependent Overfocus, Researching BPD Maze versus Taking Healing Action, a commenter commented, "Thank you for your amazing videos. A genuine help." Well, I'm glad to hear that. Glad my content is helpful, and you're very welcome. And the commenter continues, "For me, focusing on the BPD process was the first step in trying to make sense of something so heartbreaking and illogical." And that is very understandable. And it is often where people begin to learn more, right? And it is a process of understanding, but too many people take it too far, and then they don't get into the next steps of what will really help them to actually understand more about not only the person they were involved in a relationship with, whether that was somebody with BPD or NPD or ASPD or NPD, BPD, etc. And the commenter continues, "I accept it as part of my healing process so I could then move on to recognizing my contribution to the dynamic." And you see, that's the way that it's hoped that people will first understand, learn, Google, listen to videos and podcasts about borderlines or narcissists or comorbidly both, or, like just a lot of things in the cluster B area, to understand it more, but to understand it only to the point that it does help one accept that it's part of a healing process, not a means to an end by itself, listening and trying to understand BPD, NPD, ASPD, cluster B, cluster B, cluster B. And as a commenter said, they did this so that they could move on to recognizing their contribution to the dynamic. So too many people don't get to that moving on to the next step part is what I'm often talking about. And if you'd like to do that work, and you're not working with anybody right now, and you're so lost and confused and the cognitive dissonance and all of that painful stuff, but you're still focusing on the borderline, the narcissist, the cluster B, the comorbidity, and self-abandoning yourself, and maybe not realizing yet or accepting that you have codependency, I'm out here to work with you if I resonate with you. The commenter continues, "I've had lots and needed it. Lots of professional support in this process. No contact and therapy has been the only way forward." And that's what I'm always here to say as well. Glad the commenter knows that. Glad the commenter has sought out that help and therapy and is making progress or well on their way to healing. And they said that they needed the no contact and the therapy. It's been their only way forward, despite that they continue to weather a smear campaign. And I'm really sorry to hear that, because so many people are trying to weather, cope with, and struggle with, actually, in many ways, a cluster B, whether it's a borderline narcissist, psychopath, etc., smear campaign. And the commenter said, "I'd love your wider thoughts on the cluster B smear campaign based on abject and provable lies." Well, I'm going to have something coming soon on that, not only because it's important to put out there, but it's timely in that I'm going through a cluster B smear campaign, two narcissists of my own. Now, this isn't happening online. This smear campaign that I've been going through from one main narcissist, but likely flying monkey narcissist, two narcissists and the flying monkeys enablers for 4 months now, if not a little longer, but formally or well known or obviously for 4 months now is actually in real life. And these people are not people that are in my life, but they are ancillary around in my life. And there are so many cluster Bs that many people will encounter and end up being smeared by with their abject and obviously provable lies, and to all kinds of varying degrees. And cluster Bs perpetrate this in all different kinds of ways that they can be anywhere near your life. It doesn't have to be a relationship. It doesn't have to be a family member. It doesn't have to be an ex. It could just be somebody out there who's a landlord, a neighbor, boss, a coworker. They're just everywhere. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to talk about this. And there are ways to weather these and ways to handle these. And they're not all the same, but it's just important to know that no matter what is happening for anyone in a Cluster B smear campaign, one key thing, which is probably one of the most difficult things initially, is that you must entirely disengage and not speak to and not respond to and not react to the Cluster B who's doing a smear campaign on you. So, and I can't get into it just yet, but I will have more coming on my own personal experience right now as I'm living it, being smeared by two narcissists. And so, yeah, I have a lot more thoughts in general, and I can share some personal experience, how I've been dealing with it, and what is, and how we really can deal with these things effectively, but that it isn't the same in all situations. But yeah, I have a lot of thoughts to share on more widely on Cluster B smear campaigns. And as the commenter says so accurately, they are almost exclusively and always based on abject and provable lies, whether it's from a borderline, a BPD, NPD, a narcissist, or a psychopath, or maybe even somebody with histrionic personality disorder. So I'm going to have something coming very soon, or sometimes I put things up out of order, but hopefully this will go up first. And then another key point to what this commenter said, he said also on codependency, I identify with some of the symptoms you mentioned and can trace back to my childhood. But AJ, says the commenter, while the codependency traits are latent and need to be healed, they're not really latent, but could they be latent in the sense of that you weren't that people aren't consciously aware of them prior to a relationship with a Cluster B? Yes. So they're not really latent, but it seems like they are. So the commenter says, is there something about the interaction with someone who is BPD, has borderline personality disorder, or narcissistic personality disorder, or in the case of this commenter who suspects that their ex had BPD comorbid NPD, that activates the codependent traits or the codependency? Would they exist, the codependent traits, in a secure, healthy relationship? And this is a great question because I think a lot of people get confused about this. I know I've had a lot of clients explaining this to me and how they're confused and they're not sure that they have codependency because they've had other relationships wherein what's come into play with a Cluster B or from a Cluster B relationship in terms of codependency, becoming aware, and as this commenter says, that they feel like they're latent, like where are they coming from? Because people have said to me over and over, like many clients, that, I've had other relationships and it wasn't like that. And when they ended, it was more mutual and I didn't have all this cognitive dissonance, rumination, all the things that go on. It's so painful to a breakup or being ghosted or discarded by a borderline or narcissist or maybe even a psychopath. So the Cluster B breakup or discard, however these relationships tend to, and often suddenly and abruptly, and people don't know what's happening, just kind of like end, and you're like, what happened here? And it's so traumatizing that it's true that you can have codependency or traits of, or not everybody, has every trait of codependency, but you can have that codependency and have other relationships with non-cluster B individuals. And for many people, the codependency really just doesn't seem like you're not consciously aware. You seem to be doing rather well in those relationships to the best of your knowledge. And certainly it's nothing like a cluster B relationship. So can it be latent in that regard, that it's not in your consciousness, that it's not really kind of being so triggered? Definitely it can be. But the key thing to realize, and I advocate this strongly, believe this strongly, have really learned this not only from my own lived experience in the past with codependency as well, but with working with clients for 34 years. It's really true that the codependency is there, even when you're having relationships with other people, and that it won't really come to your conscious awareness and manifest itself more in more discernible ways as people learn more about the borderline or the narcissist or what have you, and then hear about codependency, and then maybe a lot of denial for a lot of people, and then other people going, oh, well, that makes sense, but people, they're like, well, how come I wasn't codependent in other relationships? Well, you still had the tendencies to be in codependency, but it just doesn't get triggered the same way as it does by cluster Bs. And then the commenter said, would they exist in a secure, healthy relationship? Well, codependent tendencies, codependent traits, or codependency, would it exist in a secure, healthy relationship? If it's there already, it is existing there. But like I said, it won't be triggered like it will be triggered by somebody with cluster B. But if somebody isn't codependent, hasn't had significant woundedness in childhood, which is hard for a lot of people to identify, but hasn't had that kind of woundedness that is really one of the connecting dots to how people get into relationships with cluster Bs. Now, not consciously, obviously, but so for somebody who's got secure attachment from a healthier childhood, does not develop codependency, then they often don't get into, or they don't stay very long in a relationship with somebody who behaves as people with BPD do, or NPD, because that intense, whether you call it love bombing or the borderline mirroring, people pleasing, etc., that intense idealization phase that borderlines bring to the beginning of a relationship, as do narcissists, and not necessarily in the exact same ways, they are so what attracts, as well as other things, people with this codependency that they might not be consciously aware of, because people with codependency have this maybe unknown, maybe not consciously realized, voracious emotional hunger to be seen and to be heard, and to help others, and to people please, and patterns of giving in the hopes of being reciprocated to, and having someone meet some of your needs. And of course, when you get with a cluster B, this becomes a nightmare, because you overgive, you give, you try to rescue, you try to do everything for them, you're trying to regulate them, you're trying to fix them, rescue them, get them into therapy, all of this stuff where you're just abandoning yourself. But in the beginning of that intensity of love bombing, of idealization, it's the codependent that's going to be like, wow, this is what I've always wanted. This is the person that I have to be with. And it goes all the way down, unconsciously, unbeknownst to most people in the beginning of these relationships, it goes all the way down to like a woundedness from childhood, to something that occurred in family of origin, or sometimes adverse experience from childhood that wounds is something that didn't happen, something that parents weren't able to give. So this is why people who have secure attachment, healthier childhoods, don't develop codependency, or very minimally, super minimally, if at all. They will be repelled by that intensity of idealization or love bombing, and maybe not like right away, but very quickly. Whereas people with codependency are needing something, right? And from childhood, and it's often in your unconscious. you're needing to be validated, or your self-worth goes up, or your self-esteem, these things that you need to know more about and be more internally oriented to creating and building and making healthy in yourself in your own life from the inside out, are being sought from the outside in. And that's what happens with cluster Bs. And nobody really is aware of this in the beginning, because it's, most people, the first time anyways, they have a relationship with a borderline or a narcissist or comorbidly both, nobody knows what's going on at that point. Because as much information as there is on this, and disinformation and everything out there online, you would think with all the people that are writing all over the internet about this and their experiences and what they're discovering, and those of us that do informational content based on this, you'd think that this is a really exploding topic that everybody gets, right? Or most people understand parts of. But no, so many people outside of this sort of niche area online of information and people sharing their experiences and trying to find their way through what's happened to them and what is it and what does it all mean, trying to understand the borderline, the narcissist, or the psychopath, or comorbidity, some mix of whatever. Well, but outside of that, like out in the real world, just like everyday life, there is still, billions of people that have never heard of this. And so each and every person comes to this in a very painful way, wherein you don't know what you're getting into, right? The idealization of love bombing just feels so darn good, and people aren't aware always, consciously, of how they might have been wounded in childhood. Because for those that had severe adverse experiences and the capital T trauma, well, yeah, people are aware of that, but maybe they don't know how it's going to impact their adult relationships or the trajectory of said. And it doesn't always happen to people in their first relationship or their second or their third. It might be like the fourth relationship and it's, a cluster B. But the point, please, excuse the dog noise in the background. It's a 9-month-old puppy playing with a 10-week-old puppy. I can get crazy sometimes. People with this codependency, and it can be different for each person, different degrees, etc. Unknown in the beginning, as are most people not aware of BPD, NPD, ASPD, and what these people really do and how injurious they are, because they come in this love bombing, idealized package that really does hit people who might unconsciously have codependency and not be aware of it all. It hits you in a very different place, in a very different way. And that's why these are trauma bonds. And even though you thought this person was the person of your dreams and they were supposed to be your life partner, your soulmate, etc., it cracks, it breaks, it devolves, it ends, it just blows up, often in really shocking ways for people. Nobody can see it coming. And even if people are starting to understand BPD or NPD or whatever at that stage, there's the denial factor of codependency. And then there's what happened to you in childhood, and it's very different individual for lots of individuals, right? Obviously. But it makes you double down and triple down and 10 times down, and maybe recycle relationships over and over, because you're repeating patterns that have to do with woundedness from childhood, as well as woundedness from this person in your life, or an ex who was in your life recently or perhaps a while ago. And with that, what happens is it's just more injurious to people in ways that they cannot understand what's happening for quite a while. And by the time you start to clue in, or you get help, and you're understanding more, then it's really hard to face the codependency. People are in denial. It's one of the major sort of symptoms of codependency. People deny it, and it really kind of sneaks up into conscious awareness. And then people don't know what to do with that. It's very complicated. It's really important to know that, yes, you can have had other relationships with people that weren't cluster B, and you will not have really experienced what you experienced with a cluster B in terms of the traits of your own codependency, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't there in the other relationships. It's just not triggered in the same way. It doesn't come into play in the same way because it's not like if you're with a healthier person in a relationship and you have codependency and you're not aware of it. Well, a healthier person with some mutuality and some give and take in a relationship is not going to trigger your core, whatever your woundedness might be. For some people, it's more severe than others. But that woundedness from family of origin in childhood, that let's face it, more of us get wounded in childhood in ways that are going to come back to impact us in relationships in adulthood, especially and usually with cluster B individuals. And so I hope that answers that question. I've talked about that prior, but it always bears repeating. I think, too, that I just wanted to come back and circle back to what the commenter said about, weathering a smear campaign and, of course, wanting my wider thoughts on cluster B smear campaigns that are, always based on abject and provable lies. So just stay tuned for that. That's coming soon. And I just want to say that when I'm going to have something coming on that it won't it'll be focused mostly on the smear campaign, what it is, the tactics used, cluster B, predominantly from cluster Bs, and mostly in the personal realm from borderlines, narcissists, psychopaths, cluster Bs, and then there's a dark triad, dark tetrad I might not cover so much in the upcoming podcast episode about this. But the point I'm trying to make is that I will talk a little bit about the personal, of course, and then there's the so that's a microcosm. Then there's the macrocosm of cluster B abuse and smear campaigns and those tactics, and it's going on and it's exploding in our world today. So for people, for businesses, in politics, the theater of politics, depending on your point of view, and also in the world, in every area, at least in the West, every area of society today, in ways that only just can exacerbate somebody's personal struggle with a cluster B or an ex or a family member with cluster B, and realizing your own codependency and trying to heal, and then getting this personal, full of malice smear campaign that it's extremely personal. But this is also happening to most of us in the Western world on a macrocosm level. And is it akin to what it's like in an interpersonal cluster B smear campaign? Well, I'm going to have more coming on that. I would really like to thank the commenter for this comment because it seems like they've done a lot of work and they have shared a lot and they asked really good questions. And so upcoming on another podcast episode will be my wider thoughts on a cluster B smear campaign or the campaigns, smear campaigns, what they're about, tactics used. What can you do? Does it have to get legal? Can you do anything legally about it? Should you be, actively responding, protecting yourself, or should you try to extinct it with disengaging? And there's no one size fits all with that, but I will be delving into that in an upcoming episode soon. And just wanted to say again also that I am currently, because it can happen anywhere, right? Cluster Bs are in every walk of life, and I am right now, I have been experiencing since April 2024, I've been experiencing a smear campaign from two narcissists, and it's very, and they're not in my personal life, but obviously they're in the realm of, real life here. It's not an online thing. And so I will be talking more about my own personal experience with it recently when it's time to. But yeah, definitely look for more on me about cluster B smear campaigns because they are in the personal and they are in almost every area of life now. It could happen at work. It could happen with a landlord where you live. It could happen with a neighbor. It could happen just about anywhere in life. And it does happen in the macrocosm. And how does that, why is that important to understand also? Because it's really important for us to learn what we can do and how we can empower ourselves while being a person who's, quote, victimized by, I don't feel like a victim, but maybe more people do, but victimized by a borderline, a narcissist, a psychopath, the dark triad, interpersonally and in the macrocosm. And so in the interpersonal, very painful, these people are so destructive, so full of malice, punishment, etc. But I will talk more about cluster B smear campaigns coming up soon. And in the meantime, just remember, though it seems that your codependency was latent, or maybe, like many people are talking out there erroneously, that you can develop the codependency in the relationship with the cluster B. No, it precedes that. But it's not going to be, your codependency is not going to be, unless it's very severe, not going to be triggered or brought to your conscious awareness when you're in a relationship with somebody who's not cluster B. And that's just kind of the way it goes. And just know, as I continue to say, and it's really important, that people do focus on, as the commenter left a comment on, codependent overfocus, researching BPD maze versus taking healing action, video I did recently. It's really important to realize that if you don't know when that point is, that you need to back off of the focus on understanding the cluster B that hurt you, whether it's a borderline, narcissist, psychopath, whatever. If you aren't aware that you need to get help and that you need to learn, lots of people need to learn. It really is difficult. I mean, obviously, intellectually, you know what changing focus means, but it's a whole different thing on an emotional level. People need to get into healing recovery journeys. I'm out here to work with people that resonate with me, because if you continue to just research about them, focus on them, they've done horrible things for which they are responsible and they deserve blame, etc., whether they can take responsibility or not. But the bottom line is, there is something, like this commenter said. They had to do some of this, to understand the heartbreaking and illogical. And then they said, I accept it as part of my healing process. So I could then move on to recognizing so the commenter is saying, his contribution to the dynamic. And if you don't get to that step and you don't make that realization and then take it to working with an expert in this area, like myself or whoever you would choose, then you're going to stay stuck in the pursuit of the focus of everything on the borderline or the narcissist or the comorbidity both or whatever it is in cluster B, and you're going to continue to abandon yourself. And this is the repetition compulsion cycle of codependency, and something you learned in childhood maladaptively to defend yourself from something that was hurtful to one degree or another. And the sooner you try to realize this, and the sooner that you get help with this, as the commenter has done, the sooner you're going to be able to really help yourself out of all of the suffering and agony of the cognitive dissonance, the rumination, the self-doubt, the what if, the if only, and again, continuing to believe erroneously that somehow this relationship was ever going to be what you had hoped for, what you thought you were experiencing in the beginning, that the cluster B person was idealizing you, and that there was a fantasy being created, and that borderlines don't necessarily do that on purpose. Some people say most narcissists do. I would say probably some do, maybe not all. But the thing of it is you really need, and it's so hard to radically accept and start to really accept that the person that you thought they were, the person that you fell in love with, the person that you were head over heels about, isn't who they are. And so then people with codependency, maybe not yet accepting that, you continue to perpetuate your own fantasy of who this person is, or you thought they were, and therefore you think somehow they're going to become, and oh, can't I just keep recycling this and working harder on it? Can't I just, maybe we could just each go our own way and keep in touch or something. That doesn't work. It takes away from your healing process, and you won't be able to break the betrayal bond that way. And the other thing is, there's no coming together magically 10 years from now, because when you heal, you're not going to want them back. You're going to finally accept they're not who you thought they were. And you're going to want to go on in a much healthier way and living your best life and knowing yourself really, really well. For the first time maybe in your life, right down to the bottom of your being, and you individuate and you become independent versus codependent. And people with BPD, some people with NPD can get much better if not recovered, but it's very, very different. Like, they're not all the same, borderlines or narcissists. And people with BPD, if they would go and seek treatment that you can't make them do, etc., yeah, they could heal and recover, and many do. It's not like the highest percentage of all of them, though. But the thing is, when they heal and recover, they don't look back to codependent partners or maybe narcissistic exes. They move forward as well. And so people with codependency need to work on the denial factor and the self-abandoning way in which you are just totally annihilating yourself in spite of what they've done to you or continue to do to you. And if you're experiencing a smear campaign like this commenter, you have my utmost empathy and compassion, and I'm going to do an episode coming up on that, because it's just putting salt in the wounds of what happened in the relationship, which isn't your fault. But it is your responsibility to realize your part in a dynamic. That's not negating what the borderline or the narcissist or the psychopath did. Not at all. There's no excuse for what they do and the way they abuse. But if you don't find your way past the researching and the focus on the cluster B, if you don't get into your own healing recovery journey working with someone, I would here to work with you if I resonate with you, then you're going to stay stuck in a really painful place. Then people get more and more angry. They hurt more and more. They get more and more lost. It's really not a place to continue looking at research, more, understanding. And then people say, because, these cluster Bs, actually, you know what? I might be really hurting and I've lost myself and I'm ignoring myself right now. But this is what codependence, I'm not saying someone says this out loud, but they're doing all this, but now I'm just fascinated with cluster Bs, or I'm just fascinated with borderlines. I've had so many clients tell me that. And the thing is, well, yeah, okay, but what about getting fascinated with who you need to heal? Yourself. Get fascinated with the possibilities of your life, this journey of healing and recovery, learning so much more, growing. It's an amazing process. I mean, obviously it doesn't come from a happy place, but you can end up in a really happy place going through the process. And so it's really important to go against the codependent kind of natural stance of focus on other. You learned it in childhood. It was to help you survive and cope with whatever was happening in your childhood. For some people, they know what it was, and it was really awful stuff. And for some people, it wasn't like that. It was just parents that were busy at work, or things that you didn't get emotionally, or maybe things happening in your family of origin that left you feeling not so emotionally safe. Codependency is a formidable mental health challenge. It arises in childhood from woundedness that might be something that's absent, or something that's happening, or something that's not happening. And it's an adaptation to survive something that you're not getting what you needed, or you're getting something you certainly didn't need. And so it's formidable, and it's important that more people realize it's not a bad word. It's not a blaming word. It's not, if you realize your own codependency, whatever traits you do identify with. Most people don't have them all. And you can reference on my YouTube channel, or you can find my codependent podcast, which I am going to get around to putting more content into, but I'm just really busy with client work, etc. And then having to have a life a little bit away from all of this. So anyway, you need to heed what this person did comment about on that video of mine, because this is somebody, like many people out there, but many people are still stuck. So if you're still stuck and you don't know this yet, what this person has shared about their process of, yeah, people start focusing on the borderline, they do, but don't keep it up ad infinitum. You've got to turn into your own process and shift the focus onto you. Then you can even understand more about what happened to you, more about what your part was. Not that your part means that you're at fault for anything the borderline did, or how the relationship blew up, or the roller coaster that it was, or recycling relationships is. Not at all. But just understand that there really comes a time when you got to stop focusing on the cluster B. Start learning. This is an emotional learning. Obviously, intellectually, everybody knows what focusing on yourself versus a borderline means. But learn that in a process of healing, recovery, working with someone, that you need to learn that emotionally, okay? And learn how to take that action toward self-focus, which for a lot of people with codependency feels selfish, negative, narcissistic. People will say this. I'm not saying this. But it feels impossible for people because people keep on looking at the cluster Bs, focusing on the cluster B, on the X, etc. Because it's a way that you, maybe very unintentionally, maybe very unconsciously, are continuing to abandon yourself because you're trying to run as fast as you can away from the pain that you have to look at in order to be able to heal and recover. And a lot of that pain came from the cluster B, absolutely. But then there's pain that, you'd already experienced in childhood from family of origin. And it's going into the work of the wounded inner child and healing the wounded inner child and understanding what happened in your childhood. And so, yeah, there's pain involved in that, but it's a precious process of self-growth, self-learning, self-love, developing self-love, self-trust, self-respect, self-worth, all of these things, self-esteem internally, so you don't need it from anybody else. And that, I have to tell you, as somebody who's gone through all this healing myself, is an amazing place from which to live your life, not always needing to please somebody else to get what you aren't sure that you deserve, but you want, and also not caring about what other people think, and knowing that you were not placed in this world to save, fix, always give to somebody else, to the annihilation of yourself, to the abandonment of yourself. No, this is something you learned from some pain in childhood. So if you don't yet know that, are you somebody who's stuck focusing on the borderline, or were they a borderline narcissist, or are they just everything in cluster B, which really isn't the case. But people are just wanting to, and then people get fascinated with it, and it's like, well, that's cool and everything, but how's that going to help you heal? It isn't. It's going to take you in the wrong direction. And so coming soon, I will have an episode on cluster B smear campaigns, as the commenter asked about. Are you still way too focused on that borderline? Or do you realize now, or have you taken action like this commenter, and do you realize that you need to take the healing action, and you need to be emotionally, not just intellectually, focused on yourself, and how did you get in that relationship, and what happened in that relationship, and then, after you look at the cluster B part and everything, what was your part, and how did you let yourself down, and why couldn't you get out, and why is it so hard to get out now? And some people have been no contact, or discarded, ghosted, discarded by somebody with BPD, or BPD, NPD, or NPD, and it's years later, and they are still ruminating daily about the person. Because this is what happens when people don't know themselves well enough due to some kind of woundedness from family of origin and childhood. And nobody should be living their life that way. No judgment, just saying it's really painful, and it doesn't let people individuate, heal the codependency, heal from the relationships, break the betrayal bonds, and really be able to live an independent, individuated life wherein you can meet your own needs and learn to love yourself, and you give yourself everything you need. And when you get into a relationship with a healthier person, when you're receiving love and care and understanding and communicating in healthy ways with someone, that's all bonus. Like, of course it's what people want, but it shouldn't be what you need. It should be what you want as an adjunct to a healthy, functional relationship that you need to heal a lot of things in order to have in your life. And it sounds like the commenter's done that and is well on their way, but still, unfortunately, weathering, as they said, a smear campaign. So just know it's your time the second you decide it is, and you need to get into help with someone. I'm out here to work with those who resonate with me. You need to take this journey for yourself and stop the focus on the cluster B or the developing fascination with cluster B, because all of that is going to keep you from knowing, loving, respecting, etc. precious you.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.